The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mr. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
Au nom de l'Assemblée Générale, j'ai l'honneur de...
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honour to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Mr. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam President of the 73rd General Assembly of the United Nations, distinguished heads of state and government, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On the eve of the 50th anniversary of Equatorial Guinea, on the 12th of October of this year, 2018, on the eve of that day, I bring you greetings of peace and freedom to all nations of the world. I bring you expressions of gratitude from the Equatorial Guinean people for the most resounding success of the United Nations since its inception in 1945. With the liberation of all colonized people. Indeed, the well-being of humanity as a fundamental goal for the United Nations could not have been achieved without freedom and dignity for peoples and nations. Peoples who had been subjected to the will of others through the colonial system. And this is why my delegation wishes to once again raise its voice in this World Forum to call for a cessation of the reductions of colonialism wherever it exists and in whatever form it takes. Madam President,
felicita vivamente
Equatorial Guinea heartily congratulates Her Excellency Maria Fernandez Espinosa as President of the 73rd General Assembly session of the United Nations. Both in terms of reflecting gender equality defended by this world organization, and for the pragmatism of Ecuador's policies, her country's policies. With scrupulous respect for the objective principles of the United Nations, we believe that under its stewardship, the United Nations, under her stewardship, the United Nations will achieve the success desired. I wish to also congratulate His Excellency Mr. Mirolaf Salyak, the outgoing President of the General Assembly, for the outstanding efforts put forth for the 72nd General Assembly session, the success of which is not debatable. Also, the work of the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, deserves to be highlighted here for the dynamic manner in which he has guided the United Nations to make the institution less bureaucratic and to bring his actions closer to member states. The topics selected for discussion during this session are indeed a major concern for the international community. As to the economic topic, and despite many resolutions and recommendations adopted by the United Nations in order to promote sustainable economic development and growth within the United Nations and the efforts put forth, there is still an ever-widening gap between the developing countries and the developed countries, and that gap makes it all the more difficult to maintain peace and stability in poor countries. This in turn compels us to put our ambitions and pride aside to support with all means available the effort to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations and the 2063 Agenda of the African Union. A supposed globalized world where equilibrium or balance, marginalization, and unsustainability would prevail would be difficult at all levels, politically, economically, socially, and morally. And this is how the current problems of massive migrations and displacement of people from the south to the north, internal instabilities within developing countries, and terrorist and rebellion movements around the world are all clear reactions to the problems of poverty and underdevelopment, which continue to prevail in developing countries due to a lack of solidarity and injustices. This is why we cannot guarantee international peace and security as long as these focus of violence that continue to be insecure and create insecurity for the lives of all peoples. Equatorial Guinea, as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, will support and will always prefer diplomacy, preventive diplomacy, in order to prevent conflict, to promote dialogue, and promote working together and the peaceful settlement of conflicts. We most especially ask for the scrupulous compliance with the principles of international law, the respect for independence and sovereignty of each and every state, non-interference in the internal affairs of other nations, the right for each country to use its own natural resources, and the promotion of equitable and fair cooperation for the reciprocal benefit of all states. Along these same lines of ideas, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea applauds the processes to bring peace undertaken between the Federal Republic of Ethiopia and that of Somalia, as well as that between the Democratic Republic of Korea, the Republic of Korea, and the United States in the Korean Peninsula, through dialogue, working together, and tolerance between the parties. This is the path. Equatorial asks that this path be taken in order to find solutions to all the conflicts that exist currently in the world, such as those in Djibouti, Somalia, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Syria, Yemen, the Middle East, Libya, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Guinea-Bissau, etc., etc. For Equatorial Guinea, coercion used to bring about decisions by using an embargo that are adopted by the Security Council never resolve conflicts and have never done so in the history of the United Nations, nor do armed interventions work in order to resolve issues of substance. To the contrary, these actions run counter to the principles of independence and state sovereignty, which confer responsibilities upon states. And with that, we wish to underscore the value of negotiations as a political and moral tool, a tool which can satisfy the parties in a conflict. Contrary to what is claimed, compulsory sentencing, which leads to an impacted state to defend itself either through pride or through the right to self-defense. The worst is that the results of these decisions tend to be a deprivation of rights, the most fundamental rights for those peoples that are affected. Turning now to the issue of international justice, Equatorial Guinea believes in the need to reform the United Nations Security Council so that this body can be more democratic and more representative in order to guarantee the interests of the current world structure. The structure of the Security Council, which was adopted in 1945, is now obsolete. It is obsolete because the political criteria of that time no longer govern our world. And in that context, the African continent is the future of humanity, and it should not be disenfranchised and left out of major decisions that could impact the world. As a cause of marginalization suffered in Africa, the Security Council should shoulder its responsibilities for recent conflicts which have broken out in the Sahel region and for the uncontrolled migration from Africa to Europe. Madam President, and now I'd like to turn to the internal evolution in my country. Despite the fact that the oil crisis is having an impact on Equatorial Guinea, socioeconomic development is still evolving positively due to peace which prevails. And so in this way, we can state that the economic emergency of the country, the economic emergence of the country will be achieved in a relatively short period of time. Indeed, the program for transition of the country to multi-party system, which was started in 1992, was characterized by a democratic openness and inclusive process, an ongoing dialogue, an open dialogue open to all, in such a manner that 14 political parties have been recognized, and to date, that number has increased to 18 political parties. That's 18 political parties for a country with less than 1.4 million inhabitants. During this period of time, we've held 16 rounds of inclusive dialogue with the political parties in the opposition, and the result has been a recognition of new political parties, constitutional reform, and reform of regulatory laws and public freedoms. And in this way, the alternates of head of state, which was unlimited before, today has been changed. Each head of state would serve 2 successive terms at the head of state. There are a number of oversight bodies for the management of public funding and public policy. The economic and social development plan that was adopted at the second economic conference in the year 2000 projects the emergence of our economy in 2020. And the more significant results of that will be construction of economic infrastructure, such as roads, ports, airports, environmental sanitation, modern hospitals, professional training centers, universities, potable water, electrification, telecommunication, and more recently, transformation into small cities for the nuclei of the main concentrations of populations in the rural zones throughout the national territory. The training of human resources has been focused on so that we can develop human resources and so that they may assume responsibility of management of national development. All of this has led to the creation of an environment of trust between the political forces, between the political parties and the people who feel empowered for their own self-fulfillment. To move beyond the effects of the crisis, the government is currently programming the 3rd phase of the National Economic Conference. The purpose of this is to implement the Social Economic Development Plan, which initially had been set for the year 2020. We call on cooperation of friend nations and multilateral assistance to second efforts of the government, which are currently geared to diversification of sources of production, industrialization, development of the productive sectors of the economy, as well as being able to use existing infrastructures. The United Nations should not serve only as a forum for dialogue. It should also serve as a forum for cooperative exchanges in order to promote the development of humanity. And lastly, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea believes that the United Nations is the highest body of multilateral diplomacy, one in which, if we can adhere to the general principles of international law with equity, we can then not only guarantee worldwide stability and peace, but we can also build a more developed society that would guarantee the rights of all peoples around the world. Thank you.
Au nom de l'Assemblée Générale, je tiens à...
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Equatorial Guinea for that statement, and I would like to ask representatives to please remain in their seats as we bid farewell to the head of state.